I am Louise Ellis, and at 27 years old, I am a captain in the United States Air Force. Tonight, I stand in my most immaculate dress uniform, yet I feel as if I'm naked before hundreds of eyes. My father, Colonel Charles Ellis, a living monument, raises a champagne flute at a gala held in his honor. I had braced myself for a speech filled with hollow platitudes, but instead, he looks directly at me, his voice booming through the microphone like a verdict. In the Ellis clan, discipline is the legacy. But it seems that legacy has passed over a generation. The entire ballroom erupts in laughter, a complicit sound that aids in erasing my mother's existence, and mine along with it. My half-brother Landon walks over, leans into my ear, and whispers the name I had tried to bury. Still as plump as ever, Odora. They have no idea that very word was the password to activate my plan. They think they're burying me alive, but they've forgotten that even ghosts leave a signal. If you have ever felt like an outsider in your own family, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, and get ready to watch a counterfeit legacy burn to the ground. The ballroom at Peterson Air Force Base was a sea of dress blues and evening gowns, a meticulously arranged world of polished brass and even more polished smiles. It was a dining out, one of the Air Force's oldest traditions. A formal dinner to honor a departing commander. Tonight, that commander was my father. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and catered steak, all underpinned by the suffocating weight of expectation. I felt like an unwelcome piece of decor, a mandatory but misplaced ornament. I stood near a pillar, the starched collar of my uniform a familiar comfort against my skin, yet doing nothing to ward off the chill I felt. My stepmother, Evelyn, surveyed the room with the practiced eye of a queen overseeing her court. Her gaze swept past generals and their wives, finally landing on me. It wasn't a look of anger or even dislike. It was colder, more dismissive. It was the look you give a photograph of the first wife that your husband forgot to put away. An inconvenient relic from a past she had worked tirelessly to erase. I was that photograph brought to life. A bubble of warmth and power seemed to form naturally around the center of the room. There stood the nuclear family. My father, Colonel Charles Ellis, Evelyn, and my half-brother Landon. Laughter flowed easily within their circle. Hands rested on shoulders, anecdotes were shared, and alliances were strengthened with every clink of a champagne glass. People orbited them, drawn to their gravity. A visible, uncrossable moat of empty space separated me from that island of belonging. I was my own solitary landmass, a testament to a chapter of my father's life that had long since been ripped out, its pages scattered. I sipped my water, the ice cubes rattling softly against the glass, the only sound in my immediate vicinity. My presence was a silent, awkward truth in a room built on comfortable fictions. Then the polite murmur of the crowd died down as my father approached the podium. A hush fell. He tapped the microphone, a sharp, piercing sound that made me flinch. He was a master of the stage, his posture exuding a lifetime of command. He began with practiced charm, thanking his colleagues, sharing a sanitized war story that drew appreciative chuckles. He spoke of values, of honor, of service. And then, he spoke of legacy. The greatest honor a man can have, he began, his voice resonating with manufactured sincerity, is to build something that will outlast him. A legacy of strength, of principle. His eyes scanned the crowd, then settled on Landon, who stood a little taller. My father's hand came to rest on Evelyn's shoulder, a gesture of possession, of partnership. In the Ellis clan, discipline is the legacy. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. I held my breath, knowing what was coming. He looked right at me, his eyes two chips of ice. But it seems, he continued, his voice dropping slightly, making the blow more intimate, more devastating. That legacy has started over, more correctly, in the second generation. The silence that followed lasted only a second. It was broken by a few uncertain coughs, then a wave of laughter. It started with those closest to him, a sycophantic ripple that grew into a tidal wave of shared amusement. They were laughing with him. They were laughing at the ghost in the room. They were laughing at my mother, the the woman whose marriage and child were now officially classified as a correctable error. The sound was a physical force, pressing in on me, stealing the air from my lungs. The pain was sharp, a dagger of humiliation twisted in my gut. This wasn't just an insult, it was a public execution of my history. Through the haze of my own silent shock, I saw Landon moving toward me. He navigated the crowd with the unearned confidence of the chosen heir, a smug smile playing on his lips. He was buoyed by his mother's approving gaze, a silent command to finish the job. He stopped beside me, his proximity an invasion. Leaning in close, his warm breath ghosting against my ear, he whispered the final, fatal blow. Still as plump as ever, Odora. Odora. The name he and his mother had concocted for me when I was 13 and struggling with my weight after a knee injury. It wasn't just a cruel playground taunt about being overweight. It was so much more insidious. Odor. It was their label for me, the unwanted scent of the past that lingered in their pristine, new home. The reminder of a life, a wife, a family that existed before them. My very presence contaminated the sanitized narrative of the perfect Ellis family they had built. Tonight, that name carried the weight of a final verdict. You do not belong. You are the smell that must be aired out. Something inside me snapped, not with a bang, but with a quiet, terrifying calm. I turned my head slightly and smiled at him. It was a smile I had practiced in the mirror for 15 years, a perfect, hollow mask forged in the fires of their relentless disapproval. The muscles in my cheeks ached with the effort, but I held it steady. My voice, when it came out, was even, almost pleasant. Enjoy the evening, Landon. I watched him walk away, rejoining his parents. The perfect trio. They were the present, celebrated and solid. They were the future, anointed and assured. I was the past, a ghost they thought they could simply ignore into non-existence. They stood there, bathed in the warm glow of adoration, accepting congratulations on a legacy built on a foundation of erasure. My erasure. My mother's erasure. But they didn't know. As I stood alone in my starched uniform, an island in a sea of their making, they had no idea what they had just done. Tonight, they hadn't buried a ghost. They had given it a reason to haunt. They call me a ghost. But they forget that ghosts are born in houses where someone has been forgotten. Ghosts are born in houses where someone has been forgotten. My haunting began long before that night at the gala. It started in a quiet, methodical purge within the four walls of a house on Hill Air Force Base, Utah, the year my father remarried. I was 12. The house, a standard-issue beige military duplex, had been filled with the warm, gentle presence of my mother. Her memory lived in the framed photos on the mantelpiece, her laughing at a picnic, her holding me as a baby. It lived in the worn spines of her favorite novels stacked on the nightstand and in the unruly, fragrant chaos of the English rose garden she'd cultivated in the small backyard. That house was my last sanctuary, the last place her ghost felt more like a guardian angel. Then Evelyn arrived. She didn't arrive like a storm, loud and destructive. She was more like a frost, silent and creeping, killing everything soft and colorful from the inside out. Her campaign to erase my mother was a masterclass in psychological warfare, executed with the precision of a surgeon. It started with the photos. One day, the picture of my mother and me was gone from the living room, replaced by a generic landscape print from a home decor store. My father said nothing. A week later, all the photos vanished, the walls suddenly bare and sterile. Soon after, new frames appeared, filled with smiling portraits of him, Evelyn, and their newborn son, Landon. A new history was being written over the old one. My mother's books disappeared from the shelves, replaced by Evelyn's interior design magazines with their glossy pages of perfect, lifeless rooms. The final, most brutal act of erasure happened in the garden. I came home from school one afternoon to find the tangled, beautiful rose bushes gone, ripped from the earth. In their place were neat, orderly rows of boxwoods, trimmed into submission. The garden, once a riot of life and scent, was now a sterile green grid. Evelyn called it cleaner. The house was no longer my home. It had become her kingdom, and I, a non-consenting citizen. My father, desperate to please his new wife, to build a new, unblemished life, allowed it all to happen. His silence was his consent. He watched as the evidence of his first love, of my mother, was systematically dismantled, and he never said a word. He was a willing accomplice in the whitewashing of his own past. The deepest wound, however, was inflicted the following year. I was 13. A bad fall during a soccer game left me with a torn ligament in my knee, and the forced inactivity made me gain weight. It was noticeable, the kind of awkward plumpness that puberty sometimes brings. Evelyn never raised her voice. Her cruelty was far more sophisticated. She would watch me at the dinner table, a look of feigned concern on her face. "You should have a little less, Louise," she'd say, her voice as sweet as poison. "It's only for your health, dear." Each comment was a small, sharp pinprick to my already fragile self-esteem. The night it all came to a head, my father had a few colleagues over from the base for dinner. Evelyn had made her signature lasagna, a rich, cheesy dish that filled the house with a comforting aroma. As she served me a modest portion, she caught my father's eye and gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. It was a silent, prearranged signal. My father stood up from the head of the table. In front of his friends, in the middle of dinner, he walked over to me, picked up my plate of pasta, and carried it to the kitchen. I can still hear the wet, scraping sound of the lasagna sliding off the plate and into the trash can. The silence in the room was absolute. The clatter of forks stopped. No one knew where to look. He placed the empty plate back in front of me. His face was a cold, emotionless mask. "The Ellis name doesn't stand for indiscipline," he said, his voice low and hard for the whole table to hear. But I knew those weren't his words. They were hers. The real message, delivered through him, was from Evelyn, and it was loud and clear. "My house has no room for you." I sat there, burning with a shame so hot it felt like my skin was on fire, and I didn't cry. I had already learned that tears were a weakness she enjoyed. If you've ever been made to feel small at your own dinner table, if you know the unique pain of being shamed by the very people who are supposed to protect you, support my story by hitting that like button. And just comment with the word "survivor" below, so we know we're not alone in this fight. After that night, Eudora was born. Landon, emboldened by the public display of my humiliation, started using the name. At first, it was just between us, a whispered insult in the hallway. But Evelyn heard it, and instead of stopping him, she would smile that thin, tight smile of hers and say, "Oh, children are so creative, aren't they?" Her casual approval was a green light. It legalized the bullying. My father didn't intervene. He later told me he saw it as a lesson in natural selection, a way for me to build character. But it wasn't a lesson. It was him, sanctioning his new son's torment of his old daughter to solidify the new family order. I became an alien in my own home. I understood that love was not on the table for me. Acceptance, if it was even possible, could only be earned through one path: excellence within my father's system. I stopped looking for warmth and started searching for armor. My life became a relentless pursuit of perfection. I threw myself into my studies, my grades soaring. I pushed my body to its limits, running until my lungs burned, doing sit-ups until my muscles screamed, transforming the soft flesh they despised into something hard and resilient. It wasn't passion that drove me. It was the desperate, clawing need to escape. The United States Air Force Academy became my obsession. It wasn't just a college, it was a door. It was the only way out I could see. It was a world my father respected, a system of discipline even he couldn't fault. It was a fortress, and I was determined to get inside. I wasn't running toward a dream. I was running away from a nightmare. As I lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling of a room that no longer felt like mine, a single, haunting question echoed in the dark. If I couldn't escape this prison, could I build another one? A place where I could at least forge the bars myself? The prison I had chosen for myself was nestled at the foot of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado Springs. The United States Air Force Academy wasn't just a campus. It was a city of discipline, carved out of the wilderness with sharp angles and unwavering purpose. When I first passed through the gates as a basic cadet, a flicker of hope ignited within me. Here, I thought, I would be judged not by my name, but by my performance. Here, I could finally forge an identity of my own. I was wrong. The prison had different walls, but the ghost of my father's name haunted its hallways just the same. The name Ellis preceded me like a shockwave. It was both a shield and a target. The instructors fell into two distinct camps. There were the older officers who had served under my father, men who saw his reflection in me. They treated me with an unnerving deference, offering praise for mediocre work and opportunities I hadn't earned. Their kindness felt like a gilded cage, another form of being unseen. Then there were the others, the ones who had been on the receiving end of my father's ambition and arrogance. They saw me as a proxy for their resentment. Their scrutiny was relentless. Every minor infraction was magnified, every success attributed to nepotism. I was either his perfect daughter or his unforgivable sin. I was never just me. Among my fellow cadets, the sentiment was simpler and more unified. I was Princess Ellis. The nickname was whispered in the mess hall and scrawled on dusty windows in the barracks. They believed my path had been paved with my father's influence, that I was a tourist in their world of meritocracy. It didn't matter that I outran most of them on the track or scored higher on avionics exams. Every achievement was tainted by suspicion. I learned to navigate the social landscape with the caution of a soldier in a minefield. I had acquaintances, study partners, and squadron mates, but I had no real friends. The isolation was a familiar, aching weight, a cold I had brought with me from home. The systematic effort to break the princess was led by a senior cadet named Riggs. He was a barrel-chested, crew-cut embodiment of toxic authority, a man who believed stripping you of your dignity was the only way to build you up. He made my life his personal project. My room inspections were brutal. He'd find fault with a single misplaced thread on a perfectly made bed. He assigned me the most grueling, pointless tasks, like cleaning the squadron's common room floor with a toothbrush. He was building his own legacy on the myth of my weakness. His cruelty peaked during a winter survival training exercise in the mountains. We were split into small teams, tasked with navigating to a series of coordinates using only a map and compass. Riggs, as the exercise supervisor, checked my team's plotted course. He looked at my map, then looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Looks good, princess," he said, handing it back. He had altered one of the coordinates with a subtle pencil mark, a change so small I didn't notice it until we were hours off course, trudging through knee-deep snow as the sun began to set. The cold was absolute, a physical presence that seeped into my bones. The wind howled through the pines, and the world became a disorienting swirl of white. My teammates were exhausted and angry, their resentment directed at me for the navigational error. I was alone, leading them deeper into a frozen wilderness, the weight of their safety heavy on my shoulders. We finally found our way back to the extraction point hours after everyone else, half frozen and utterly spent. As I stumbled out of the woods, shaking uncontrollably, Riggs was waiting. He didn't offer a blanket or a word of concern. He just looked at my pathetic state, his eyes filled with grim satisfaction. "Thought a colonel's daughter would be tougher than that," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. That night, shivering in my bunk, the profound loneliness was overwhelming. The escape I had fought so hard for felt like a fraud. It was in that moment of despair that I sought a different kind of sanctuary. Late at night, when the barracks were finally silent, I would slip away to the academy's library. It was a vast, cathedral-like space, and in its hushed aisles, I found a different kind of armor. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just a place to disappear. One night, my hand landed on a book with a simple cover. Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. I started reading, and the world shifted. For the first time, the shame and pain that had defined my life were given a name, not as a personal failing, but as a universal human experience. Brown wrote about the power of vulnerability, and a particular sentence seized my soul. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. I read it over and over. My father's brand of discipline, the rigid control, the refusal to show emotion, wasn't strength. It was a shield to hide his own profound insecurity. Evelyn's cruelty wasn't power, it was the terrified lashing out of someone who felt threatened. And my own carefully constructed walls of perfection weren't resilience. They were a prison built of fear. True courage, I began to understand, was the willingness to stand in the arena, even if it meant getting knocked down. To face the hurt without flinching. The words on those pages became my first real instructor, teaching me a language of strength my father had never known. Armed with this new understanding, I found my true refuge. It wasn't in the library or on the running track. It was in the cold, quiet hum of a T-38 Talon flight simulator. In that cramped, mock cockpit, the world fell away. There was no Ellis, there was no Odora. There was only me, the glowing instrument panel, and the endless digital sky. Here, the rules were absolute and fair. The laws of physics didn't care about my last name. Aerodynamics didn't pass judgment. I could spend hours in there, long after my required sessions were over, practicing emergency procedures, mastering complex maneuvers, pushing the simulated aircraft to its limits, and then gently bringing it back. In the silence of the cockpit, surrounded by the soft glow of the gauges, I found true control. It wasn't the brittle, aggressive control my father wielded over others. It was the quiet, profound mastery of myself. Late at night, I'd sit alone in that simulator, the rest of the academy asleep, my hands moving with a fluid, practiced grace over the throttle and stick. I was a ghost, finally learning how to fly. The man who changed the course of my life didn't wear a uniform. He wore a faded gray wool sweater with worn patches at the elbows and smelled faintly of chalk dust and burnt coffee. Retired Colonel Marvin Grayson was a living legend in the world of aerodynamics, a civilian instructor at the academy who was spoken of in tones of reverence and a little bit of fear. He was a genius, and like many geniuses, he operated on a plane entirely separate from the rigid world of military protocol. His office was a chaotic marvel of controlled disarray, stacks of books threatening to avalanche onto a desk littered with papers and half-empty mugs. It was the antithesis of the obsessive, sterile order my father enforced. Marvin Grayson, I would soon learn, didn't care about order. He cared about truth. He taught an advanced course on flight dynamics, a class most cadets dreaded. He was known for his brutally complex questions and his utter intolerance for lazy thinking. I was on edge the first day, expecting my last name to once again define me before I'd even spoken a word. He posed a question about vortex dynamics so intricate the room fell into a dead, uncomfortable silence. I saw the answer in my head, a clear, elegant equation, and after a moment's hesitation, I raised my hand. I explained the principle, my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. He listened, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he didn't offer praise or a smile. He just gave a short, sharp nod. But his eyes, for the first time since I'd arrived at this institution, someone's eyes, held a flicker of genuine interest. He wasn't looking at Colonel Ellis's daughter. He was looking at a mind that worked. It was a novel, dizzying sensation. A few days later, I was in my sanctuary, the T-38 Talon simulator, running through emergency protocols. I didn't know Marvin was there until the exercise was over. He had been standing in the shadows behind the cockpit, silent and observant. I'd been practicing one of the most high-stress scenarios, a dual engine failure on final approach. It was a test designed to induce panic. In the simulation, the comforting roar of the engines had died, replaced by a terrifying silence and a cascade of warning lights. But I didn't panic. I remembered Brené Brown's words about courage. I focused on my breath, on the procedures I had practiced 1,000 times. My hands moved with a calm, deliberate precision over the controls, flipping switches, adjusting trim, feeling for the slightest response from the dying aircraft. I wasn't fighting the machine. I was in a conversation with it, a gentle, desperate negotiation. When the simulated wheels touched the digital runway, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Interesting, a quiet voice said from behind me. I jumped, turning to see Colonel Grayson leaning against the door frame. Most people try to wrestle the storm, he said, his voice a low rumble. They try to force the machine into submission. You, kid, you learn to dance with it. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving me sitting in the silent cockpit with a feeling I couldn't name. It felt like warmth. It felt like being seen. The true test came a week later, not in a simulator, but at 10,000 feet over the Colorado plains. I was on a solo training flight when I encountered it, a sudden, violent pocket of wind shear during my landing approach. The plane dropped like a stone, the wings shuddering, the controls going slack in my hands. This was real. This was a life-or-death exam. For a terrifying second, the old voices screamed in my head. Eudora, princess, not good enough. Then Marvin's voice cut through the noise. You learn to dance with it. I took a breath. Instead of fighting, I yielded. Instead of yanking the controls, I made a series of minute, delicate adjustments, easing the pressure, letting the aircraft find its own equilibrium as I guided it through the turbulence. I didn't conquer the wind, I navigated it. The landing was perfect, a smooth kiss of rubber on asphalt. As I taxied down the runway, I saw him waiting for me, standing by the hangar. A rare, small smile touched the corners of his mouth as I climbed out of the cockpit, my legs still shaking. I was right, he said simply. You've got the hands of a ghost. Invisible, precise, and lethal when you need to be. He looked at me, his gaze analytical but kind. Ghost fits you better than princess. In that moment, on a windswept tarmac under a vast blue sky, he gave me a new name. And with that one word, he vanquished Eudora forever. Ghost wasn't an insult. It was a title. It was an identity I'd earned. Later that week, he called me to his office. The confirmation of my parentage had finally made its way to him. When I walked in, his expression was serious. I knew your father, Louise, he said, skipping any preamble. He motioned for me to sit. Charles Ellis is a fine tactician, one of the best. But he makes a classic, fatal mistake. He mistakes control for respect. He poured 2 mugs of coffee from an old sputtering machine in the corner. It was black, thick, and brutally strong. He handed one to me. Your father believes discipline is a whip to bend the world to his will, he continued, settling into his cluttered chair. A tool for enforcement. But remember this, Ghost. True discipline is clarity. It's about being ruthlessly honest with yourself, especially when no one is watching. It's about integrity, not intimidation. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes fixed on me over the rim of the mug. The Ellis name can open a lot of doors for you. People will salute the uniform, but they'll bow to the name. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. But be careful. That name can also be a cage. A gilded one, but a cage all the same. Don't let his legacy become your prison. Marvin's warning, that name can also be a cage, echoed in my mind for weeks. It was a prophecy that fulfilled itself sooner than I could have imagined. They arrived on a crisp autumn Saturday during a parents' weekend I hadn't told them about. I was walking across the parade ground, the terrazzo, when I saw them. My father, Evelyn, and Landon, standing near the chapel, looking like a perfect, powerful family unit on a college tour. My heart sank. This wasn't a visit, it was an invasion. It began as a performance of power, a carefully staged play for the benefit of the Academy's leadership. My father, in a tailored suit that still carried the ghost of a military uniform, draped an arm over my shoulders as my squadron commander approached. So proud of this one, he boomed, his voice resonating with manufactured warmth, continuing the Ellis family tradition. Evelyn, flawless in a cashmere coat, stood beside him, her smile a perfect, polished mask of maternal pride. Landon, already taller than me and carrying himself with the unearned confidence of a chosen son, simply nodded along. I felt like a prop, a carefully positioned chess piece in a game I had never agreed to play. My father lavished praise on my academic and flight records, but every compliment was a backhanded claim on my success. She's disciplined, just as I taught her, he'd say. Or, her performance is exactly in line with the expectations I've set. He wasn't acknowledging my hard work. He was branding it. He was stamping my achievements with his own name, making it clear to everyone that my success was not my own, but merely an extension of his legacy. I stood there, smiling my practiced, empty smile, a puppet in the family's public relations campaign. The gilded cage Marvin had warned me about felt cold and tight around my ribs. The public performance gave way to a private one over dinner at a stuffy, overpriced steakhouse downtown. The meal was a minefield of strained small talk and unspoken tensions. My father talked about his consulting work, Landon about his own flight training, and Evelyn orchestrated the conversation, ensuring it never veered into any territory that was genuinely personal or, God forbid, emotional. I mostly listened, a silent observer at a table of strangers who shared my blood. Then, halfway through the main course, Evelyn placed a beautifully wrapped gift box on the table in front of me. It was from a high-end department store, tied with a perfect silk ribbon. "I saw this and just thought of you, Louise," she said, her voice smooth and honeyed. "A little something to celebrate your success." A knot of suspicion tightened in my stomach. Evelyn's gifts were never just gifts. They were messages, calculated moves in her long, silent war against me. I opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, was a stunning evening gown. It was a deep sapphire blue, elegant and simple. It was genuinely beautiful. A fragile, foolish sliver of hope flickered within me. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was an olive branch. And then I saw the size tag attached to the collar. My blood ran cold. The dress was a size 4. I was a size 8. It wasn't a mistake, an oversight. It was a statement as clear and brutal as the night my father had thrown my dinner in the trash. The message was the same. You are still not good enough. You still don't fit. You're still the girl who needs to be made smaller. It was a ghost from the past, a whisper of odora in silk and satin. I looked up from the box and met Evelyn's eyes. Her smile was perfect, unwavering, and utterly devoid of warmth. Across the table, I saw Landon catch the look on my face. A slow, knowing smirk spread across his lips. He understood the message perfectly. My father, oblivious or perhaps willfully ignorant, chose that moment to reveal the true purpose of their visit. He cleared his throat, setting down his steak knife with a decisive click. Landon is being considered for a highly competitive slot in the F-22 test pilot program at Nellis Air Force Base, he announced, his voice taking on the official tone he used for important matters. He looked directly at me, his gaze pointed. Your academic record here is exemplary, Louise. Your instructors hold you in high regard. He paused for effect. I need you to write a letter of recommendation for your brother, a glowing one. It will carry significant weight coming from another member of the Ellis family who has excelled in this environment. There it was. The cage door slamming shut. He wanted to use the reputation I had bled for, the respect I had earned through sleepless nights and punishing work, as a stepping stone for his real heir. He wanted me to leverage my own hard-won capital to benefit the son who had stood by and smirked while I was being psychologically dismantled. It was the family business model in its purest form. My accomplishments were a corporate asset to be used for the advancement of the designated successor. The old Louise would have crumbled or argued. The old Louise would have felt the sting of tears and the hot rush of useless anger. But that Louise was gone. In her place was the ghost, the quiet observer Marvin had named. I looked at my father, at the entitled expectation in his eyes. I looked at Evelyn's triumphant smile. I looked at Landon's smug face. I folded the tissue paper back over the dress that would never fit. I'll consider it, I said, my voice even and calm. The surprise on their faces was a small, satisfying victory. They had expected compliance or an emotional outburst. They were not prepared for calm, detached consideration. That night, back in the sterile quiet of my dorm room, I took the dress out of the box. I held it up against myself in front of the mirror. The beautiful sapphire blue fabric was a lie. It was a symbol of the person they wanted me to be. Smaller, quieter, more palatable. A person who would fit neatly into the box they had built for me. For a moment, I let myself feel the full, cold weight of their cruelty. I let the anger rise, not as a wildfire, but as a controlled, cold burn. Then I carefully folded the dress. I didn't throw it away. That would have been too emotional. Instead, I placed it back in its box and pushed it deep into the bottom of my closet, burying it under my uniforms. I was done trying to fit into their world. It was time to make them face mine. They wanted a recommendation, a piece of paper with pretty words on it. I stared at my own reflection, at the determined, cold eyes looking back at me. They would get a demonstration instead. A performance they would never forget. Not on paper, in the sky. My performance, the one I had promised myself I would deliver, came not on paper, but in the heart of the Nevada desert. Nellis Air Force Base is where the best of the best are forged, and I had earned my place there. Through sheer merit, I had secured a slot in the F-22 Raptor Development Program, the same slot my father had intended for Landon. My brother was there too, in a different squadron, a constant smirking reminder of the family's expectations. But in the sky, pedigree meant nothing. Performance was everything. The day it happened was blisteringly hot, the kind of day the heat shimmers off the tarmac in waves. My mission was a routine systems test, evaluating a new experimental radar-absorbent skin integrated into the Raptor's fuselage. I was a test pilot now, a first lieutenant, and the cockpit of the F-22 felt more like home than any house I had ever lived in. As I climbed into the sky, leaving the brown smudge of the desert floor behind, I felt that familiar sense of peace. Up here, I was in control. I was the ghost. The test protocol was simple. Fly a predetermined pattern while the ground crew monitored my radar cross-section. But as I executed a high-G turn, something felt different. The aircraft responded with an unusual fluidity, a strange, frictionless grace. It was like the air itself was parting for me. On a hunch, I deviated from the flight plan, pushing the Raptor into a series of complex, layered maneuvers, a dance of my own design. I felt the connection Marvin had talked about. I wasn't wrestling the storm, I was dancing with it. Then my comms crackled. The voice of the flight controller was tight with confusion. "Ghost, we've lost your signal. Repeat, we have lost your radar signature. Acknowledge." I looked at my own instruments. Everything was perfect. "Control, Ghost is here, all systems green," I replied. "Negative, Ghost. You are not on our screens. You are completely gone." A thrill, sharp and electric, shot through me. I stayed in the zone, continuing my aerial ballet, feeling the Raptor move as an extension of my own body. For 6 minutes, I was invisible. A true ghost in the machine. When I finally eased off and my signature reappeared on their screens, the radio exploded with a torrent of excited, disbelieving voices. Back on the ground, the data confirmed it. During those 6 minutes, my maneuvers had caused the experimental skin to generate a perfect, sustained radar refraction field. It wasn't just stealth, it was absolute invisibility. I hadn't just run a test, I had stumbled upon the holy grail of aerial combat. The euphoria was intoxicating. This was mine. A discovery born from my skill, my intuition. This was the moment that would finally, irrevocably, prove my worth. There was no celebration, no debrief with cheering engineers. Instead, I was escorted by 2 grim-faced military police officers to a SIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility. It was a windowless, soundproof box of a room, designed to keep secrets in and the outside world out. The air inside was cold and sterile. And sitting at the steel table in the center of the room, looking every bit the powerful Pentagon consultant he now was my father. He wasn't smiling. His face was a mask of cold professional appraisal. "Sit down, Lieutenant," he said, his voice flat. He didn't use my name. I remained standing. "What's going on?" The data was a breakthrough. "The data," he said slowly, "has been contained. Your after-action report has been amended. For the purposes of the official record, the event has been classified as an anomalous sensor malfunction during a failed simulation." The cold in the room seeped into my blood. A failed simulation? That's a lie. This is a real discovery. My discovery. My father looked at me then, and there was not a flicker of paternal warmth in his eyes. It was the gaze of a corporate executive assessing a problematic asset. Everything you find, everything you achieve in that cockpit belongs to the United States Air Force, he said, his voice like ice. And we, the people who run it, decide what is best for the program, not a junior lieutenant who got lucky. The words were a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Lucky. He had dismissed the pinnacle of my career as luck. But he wasn't finished. The killing stroke was yet to come. This technology is too significant to be attached to the story of a fortunate accident, he continued, his tone utterly merciless. It needs a proper face, a leader who can champion it into the next generation, a pilot who carries the right bloodline for the future. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air like a guillotine. Landon will be taking lead on the new project development. He had not only stolen my discovery, he had handed my life's work, my moment of triumph, to my brother, right in front of me. It was the final, ultimate act of erasure. I was not just the forgotten daughter, I was the ghostwriter for the chosen son's legacy. He was completing the mission Evelyn had started all those years ago, sanitizing the family history, correcting the mistake of his first marriage by sacrificing its only living proof. I was transferred the next day, a reassignment to a desk job at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. I was being buried in a mountain of paperwork. That last night at Nellis, I was given 2 hours to clear out my office. The base was quiet, the desert sky outside littered with a billion indifferent stars. My heart felt like a shattered piece of glass in my chest. But my mind was chillingly clear. The ghost had taken over. Have you ever poured your entire being into something, created something truly remarkable, only to have it snatched away and given to someone else by the very people who were supposed to support you? If you know that uniquely soul-crushing feeling of injustice, hit the like button and tell me in the comments. What's one word that comes to mind when your biggest achievement is stolen? I sat down at my computer one last time. My movements were calm, methodical. With practiced efficiency, I located the original, unredacted data file from my 6-minute flight. The raw telemetry, the sensor logs, everything. It was a beautiful, perfect string of data that proved everything. I compressed it into a single file. Then I began to encrypt it, layering it with a complex, multi-tiered algorithm I had designed myself back at the academy. It was virtually unbreakable. When the encryption was complete, the system prompted me for a file name. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I named the file Echo Protocol. I leaned back in my chair, the only sound the quiet hum of the machine. The pain was still there, a cold, heavy stone in my gut. But now it had a purpose. It was fuel. I whispered the words into the empty room, a promise to myself that had now become the central truth of my existence. You think you can bury me, Father, but you forget. Even a ghost leaves a signal. My exile to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio was meant to be a burial. I was supposed to suffocate under mountains of paperwork, my name fading into bureaucratic obscurity while Landon's star rose. My father had written me out of the script. What he never anticipated was that I would use my time in the shadows to study the stage, the actors, and the script itself, preparing to rewrite the entire play. For 3 years, I wasn't a pilot. I was a sponge. The Air Force, in its infinite, ironic wisdom, assigned me to the Acquisitions and Logistics Command. I wasn't flying jets. I was learning how they were bought, sold, and built. I immersed myself in the labyrinth of defense procurement protocols, federal acquisition regulations, and the arcane art of military-grade encryption. The pain of my betrayal didn't disappear. I simply repurposed it. It became a cold, clean fuel for my focus. While other officers were counting down the days to their next flight, I was studying schematics, memorizing budget codes, and earning top-level certifications in secure data management. I was forging my weapon. During this time, I found a new mentor in the base library, Sun Tzu. His book, The Art of War, became my Bible. One passage in particular became my mantra: know your enemy and know yourself, and you will not be imperiled in 100 battles. I knew my enemy. My father's greatest weakness wasn't a flaw in his strategy, but the strategy itself. His all-consuming pride. He needed a legacy, a monument to his name. And the bigger the monument, the longer the shadow it casts. A perfect place for a ghost to hide. Then, the opportunity I'd been manufacturing for 3 years finally arrived. The Air Force and the defense contractor, Lockheed Aerospace, were commercializing my stolen technology under a new project codename, Phantom X. The project was entering its final, multi-billion-dollar contract phase, and they needed a technical liaison officer from the Air Force to oversee the transition. The candidate needed to be a pilot with a top-secret clearance, an expert in procurement regulations, and a specialist in the system's unique encryption architecture. There was only one person in the entire Air Force who fit that description. I had become the key to the very lock my father had designed to keep me out. My exile had become my Trojan horse, and the system that had buried me was now inviting me back into the heart of Troy. The boardroom at Lockheed Aerospace was a cathedral of corporate power, all glass, steel, and hushed, expensive silence. And there they were, the holy trinity of the Ellis legacy. My father, now a highly paid senior consultant for Lockheed, held court at the head of the table, charming a group of skeptical investors. Landon, the golden boy and lead test pilot, sat beside him, looking handsome and confident in his flight suit, nodding at all the right moments. And me, Captain Louise Ellis, the quiet liaison officer, sitting on the sidelines, taking notes. My father presented my flight algorithms as his own intellectual property, speaking of their elegance and power with the proprietary pride of a creator. He was brilliant at it, weaving a narrative of vision and destiny. Landon would chime in with anecdotes from the cockpit, adding the human touch. They were a perfect team. The meeting was going smoothly until an older investor with sharp, intelligent eyes leaned forward. "It's an impressive system, Colonel," he said. "But I have a technical question. The energy consumption for the refraction field seems exponentially high during multi-vector maneuvers. How have you mitigated the thermal bleed-off without compromising the stealth signature?" The room went silent. I watched my father's face. For the first time, the confident salesman vanished. A flicker of panic appeared in his eyes. He knew the concept, but not the deep mathematics. He started to bluff, stringing together technical jargon that didn't quite connect. I saw my opening. "If I may, sir," I said, my voice calm and clear. The investor turned to me. "The thermal bleed-off isn't mitigated, it's rerouted," I explained, standing and walking to the whiteboard. The algorithm uses a dynamic recursive loop to convert excess thermal energy into a low-frequency pulse, which is then vented through the trailing edge flaps. It actually enhances the stealth signature by creating a microdoppler effect that mimics atmospheric distortion. I finished writing the core equation on the board. The silence in the room was now one of stunned respect. The investor stared at the equation, then back at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Incredible," he murmured. I didn't look at Landon. I looked directly at my father. The charm was gone. The pride was gone. All I saw in his eyes was cold, hard fury, mixed with something else I had never seen there before: fear. He was looking at me as if for the first time, and seeing not his daughter, but the monster he had created. That night, fueled by a cold surge of adrenaline, I stayed late. I used my high-level access to dive deep into the Phantom X source code. I spent hours scrolling through millions of lines of programming, the digital ghost of my own creation. And then, I found it. Buried deep within the primary flight control module, a piece of code so fundamental it could never be removed without causing a total system collapse. It was a digital signature I had embedded in the original algorithm on a whim, all those years ago. Just a single 4-character string left in the code comments, LEO02. It stood for Louise Ellis, second flight of that fateful day. It was irrefutable. It was undeniable. It was my name, hidden in plain sight the entire time. I leaned back in my chair and a slow, cold smile spread across my face. The game had officially begun. A week later, the final piece fell into place. An encrypted email arrived in my inbox from an anonymous, untraceable address. The message was short, just a few lines of text. Final contract is being awarded at the Ellis Family Gala. General Abbott has questions. It's time. I knew it was Marvin. The gala to celebrate my father's legacy would be the perfect stage. It was the monument to his pride, and I was going to burn it to the ground. From the sterile quiet of my corporate apartment, I logged into the Lockheed Aerospace mainframe. I used my liaison credentials to navigate through layers of security until I reached the presentation server for the gala. And there, I found my weapon. Echo Protocol. I wrote a simple script, a trigger command hidden within the video file that was set to play that night. On activation, the script would run, accessing the file's original metadata and displaying it for all to see. The bait was set. The trap was sprung. My father's entire world was about to fall into it. The ballroom felt familiar. It was the same grand cavernous space at Peterson Air Force Base, filled with the same people, the same suffocating perfume of power and prestige. 3 years had passed since the night I was publicly disowned here, but as I stood in the back of the room, a guest at a gala honoring my own family, the memory was as fresh as an open wound. I was no longer the lost, heartbroken girl. I was Captain Louise Ellis, the technical liaison for Lockheed Aerospace. I was the Trojan horse, and I was about to burn the city to the ground. On the massive screens flanking the stage, a professionally produced video began to play. It was a slick, polished tribute, a piece of corporate propaganda designed to seal the Phantom X deal. The video opened with dramatic shots of the F-22 Raptor tearing through the sky, set to a soaring orchestral score. Then, it cut to Landon. He looked heroic, the very picture of the all-American ace pilot, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The narrator's deep, authoritative voice boomed through the speakers, praising Landon Ellis as the future of the Air Force, the pilot whose innate skill and vision were ushering in a new era of aerial dominance. The camera cut to the audience, landing on my stepmother, Evelyn. She was looking at her son on the screen, her face a mask of rapturous pride, the triumphant smile of a queen whose heir was about to be coronated. My father sat beside her, looking pleased, the architect admiring his perfect creation. The video ended, and the room erupted in applause. Landon, looking impossibly handsome in his dress uniform, walked onto the stage, basking in the adoration. He stepped up to the podium, letting the applause wash over him before raising a hand for silence. He had the easy charisma of a man who had never known a day of doubt in his life. "Thank you," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "It's an honor to be here, to be part of a legacy of service." He glanced towards our father, who nodded approvingly. Then his eyes scanned the crowd and found me, standing in the shadows at the back. A small, self-satisfied smirk played on his lips. "Of course," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "I couldn't have been up there without the foundational work of a nameless engineer who wrote the initial flight code. She is, in fact, in this very room tonight." He gave a dismissive little gesture in my direction. It was a perfectly executed move, a way to acknowledge my existence while simultaneously diminishing it, reducing my breakthrough to a mere footnote in his grand story. He was throwing a crumb to the ghost in the attic. But my script had a different ending. The moment the words left his mouth, my trigger was activated. The massive screens behind him flickered. The polished corporate logo for the Phantom X project vanished. The image of Landon, the hero, disappeared. For a split second, the screens went completely black, plunging the front of the ballroom into a sudden, shocking darkness. A collective gasp went through the room. Then the screens blinked back to life, not with a video, but with a stark, green-on-black command line interface. The cursor blinked once, twice. Then, lines of code began to cascade down the screens, a frantic, silent waterfall of raw data. The audience stared in stunned silence, their applause frozen in their throats. This was not part of the show. The scrolling code stopped abruptly. The cursor blinked one final time. And then a single line of text appeared, stark white against the black background in a large, bold font that no one could miss. Original flight metadata restored. A dead silence fell over the ballroom. You could hear a pin drop. Then, directly beneath the first line, a second line of text materialized, burning itself onto the screen and into the memory of everyone present. Authorized Phantom Pilot. First LT L. Ellis. The world stopped. Every eye in the room followed a single, invisible line. From the name on the screen to the ashen, horrified faces of Charles and Evelyn Ellis. And then, finally, to me. The ghost, standing in the back of the room, no longer in the shadows, but bathed in the sudden, harsh glare of the truth. From the front table, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. General Abbott, a formidable four-star general known for his integrity, stood up, his face a thundercloud of controlled fury. He fixed his gaze on my father. Colonel Ellis, his voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a razor. Perhaps you can explain this. My father was frozen, a statue carved from ice. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He looked utterly, completely broken. Evelyn reached for his hand, her perfect smile now a grotesque rictus of panic. Their carefully constructed world had just detonated. And then, the most extraordinary thing happened. As a wave of murmurs and whispers began to sweep through the room, as other senior officers started to stand, turning to look at me with a mixture of shock and newfound respect, the cameras that had been broadcasting the event to monitors around the room swiveled. They focused on the one person still on stage, Landon. He stood paralyzed for a moment, his gaze shifting from the damning evidence on the screen to me, his sister, the woman he had belittled his entire life. The smirk was gone. The arrogance was gone. In its place was a raw, dawning comprehension. He saw the truth. He saw the years of lies, the stolen legacy, the profound injustice of it all laid bare. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He straightened his shoulders, pulling himself to his full height, not as the heir, but as an officer of the United States Air Force. And then, with a crisp, decisive motion that echoed in the silent room, he raised his hand to his brow and rendered a perfect, formal salute. It wasn't just a salute. It was a surrender. It was an apology. It was an acknowledgement. My father and Evelyn stood abandoned, their dynasty crumbling around them in the silent ruin of their own making. With a calm I didn't know I possessed, I raised my own hand and returned the salute. And in that moment, the silent recognition from my brother was louder, more profound, and more satisfying than any applause could ever be. The aftermath of a detonation isn't loud, it's silent. It's the ringing in your ears, the dust settling in the quiet air, the slow dawning realization of the new landscape that has been created. The gala ended, not with a bang, but with a quiet, orderly evacuation of a crime scene. The crime, of course, was the truth. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window of my temporary quarters on base, watching the pre-dawn light begin to paint the edges of the Colorado sky. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion, a weariness that felt bone deep. The war was over. The victory was absolute. But victory, I was learning, felt less like triumph and more like a vast, quiet emptiness. The next morning, I knew where I would find him. The hangar housing the Phantom X was cavernous and cool, smelling of jet fuel and ozone. The jet sat in the center of the vast space, a sleek, deadly predator at rest. And standing before it, staring up at its silent form, was Landon. He didn't turn as I approached, the soft scuff of my boots echoing in the hangar. He just kept staring at the plane, the machine that was supposed to have been his future. "You ruined everything," he said. His voice was flat, hollowed out, stripped of its usual arrogance. It was the voice of a boy who had just watched his kingdom burn. I stood beside him, following his gaze. The Phantom was beautiful, a perfect marriage of form and function. My creation, my truth. "No, Landon," I said, my own voice softer than I expected. "I didn't ruin anything. I just turned on the lights. It's up to us to choose where we stand in that light." I expected anger, accusations, denial. Instead, he just slumped slightly, a barely perceptible deflation of his proud posture. I didn't know, he whispered, the words barely audible. I swear, Louise, I never knew. I believed him. Landon was arrogant, privileged, and often cruel, but he was a product of the system my father had built. He was a prince who had never thought to question the legitimacy of his own crown. I looked at him, at the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion on his face. He was a pilot about to face pressures he had never been trained for. The satisfaction I had anticipated, the moment of lording my victory over him, never came. All I felt was a strange, unfamiliar stirring of something else, something akin to responsibility. You're clenching your jaw, I said. He looked at me, confused. What? You're clenching. It restricts blood flow. When you're pulling high G's, it'll make you pass out faster. I stepped in front of him. Watch me. Breathe in. Fill your belly. Now, as you exhale, flex everything from your calves up. Tense your core like you're about to take a punch. And make this sound. Hic. He stared at me blankly. It's the anti-G straining maneuver, I said patiently. It's what keeps the blood in your head so you don't black out and crash a billion-dollar aircraft. This is real discipline, Landon. It's not about controlling other people. It's about doing what it takes to keep yourself alive. He watched me, his eyes wide. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he mimicked the maneuver. For the first time, I wasn't Odora. I wasn't the ghost. I was his sister. I was afraid. The voice came from the entrance of the hangar. My father stood there, silhouetted against the bright morning light. He looked like he had aged a decade overnight. His uniform, usually immaculate, seemed to hang off his frame. He walked towards us, his steps heavy, each one an effort. He didn't look at Landon. His eyes were fixed on me. I was afraid of you, he said, his voice a hoarse rasp. From the day you were born, you had her in you. Your mother. He stopped a few feet away, the magnificent jet standing between us like a judge. She was brilliant, uncontainable. She never saw the world in terms of rules and hierarchies, only possibilities. I couldn't control her, and it terrified me. He finally looked away, his gaze falling on the floor. When she was gone, I thought, I could build something orderly, something I understood, a legacy of discipline. But you were still there. A living reminder of a past I couldn't control. So I chose ease over you, Louise. I chose the son who reflected my ambition over the daughter who reflected my fears. His confession hung in the air, raw and pathetic. It wasn't an apology. It was an explanation, born of a cowardice so profound it had poisoned all of our lives. He looked from me to Landon, his face etched with a tragic, self-inflicted sorrow. I made you both pay the price for my own private wars. He stood there for a long moment, a king in the ruins of his own making. Then, he turned to leave. At the edge of the hangar's shadow, just before stepping back into the light, he paused. He didn't turn around. Legacy, he said, his voice distant, as if speaking to himself. It isn't what you pass on to the next generation. Sometimes, it's the baggage you learn to let go of. The words struck me with the force of a physical impact. They were the most honest thing he had ever said to me. For the first time, I didn't see a tyrant or a villain. I saw a small, frightened man, imprisoned by the very legacy he had spent his life trying to build. Back in my room, the silence felt different. It was no longer empty. It was peaceful. I picked up my phone and dialed a familiar number. Marvin answered on the second ring. Grayson. It's done, I said simply. There was a pause on the other end, then a low chuckle. I figured as much. The shockwaves are already reaching DC. Another pause. So, what now, Ghost? I walked to the window and looked out. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, stretching out to an infinite horizon. It looked welcoming. For the first time, it didn't feel like a place I had to fight my way into. It felt like home. Now, I said, a sense of profound, boundless relief washing over me. I learned to fly without having to disappear. The war was finally over. A year can be a lifetime. It's long enough for wounds to scar over, for dust to settle, and for new things to grow in the ruins of the old. 1 year after the gala that detonated my family, I stood on another stage, under a different sky. The air was crisp with the scent of autumn in Colorado. Behind me, a new building gleamed in the sun, its glass and steel facade reflecting the endless blue. A sign near the entrance read, "The Ellis Center for Precision Flight Training." My father had donated a significant portion of his fortune to build it. It was his penance, his attempt to build something real out of the wreckage. I looked out at the assembled crowd of cadets, officers, and dignitaries. I was Major Louise Ellis now, the commander of this new center. I was no longer a ghost, hiding in the shadows. I was the architect of this new dawn. I stepped up to the podium, my voice clear and steady when I spoke. "Discipline isn't about perfection," I said, my eyes finding Marvin Grayson in the front row, who gave me a slow, proud nod. "It's not about control or building a flawless legacy. It's about honesty. It's about the brutal, unflinching honesty required to face the truth under pressure, especially the truth about yourself." I paused, letting the words settle. And sometimes, in order to truly be seen, you have to learn how to disappear first. After the ceremony, there was a small reception. I was awarded the Phantom Service Medal for my foundational work on the project. As the applause died down, Landon walked onto the stage. He was a captain now, a squadron leader. He looked different. The easy arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady confidence. I expected another salute, the formal gesture that had started our long thaw. Instead, he walked right up to me and wrapped his arms around me in a hug. It was hesitant at first, then firm, the embrace of a brother. "I'm sorry, Lou," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I had never heard from him before. "For everything." "I know," I whispered back, and I did. From his seat in the front row, our father watched us. Evelyn was not there. Friends said she had moved back to the East Coast, unable to live in the shadow of a legacy that was no longer hers to control. My father stood up, not as a colonel, not as a consultant, but just as a man. He looked at me, his daughter, and for the first time, his eyes were clear of fear and pride. He didn't say a word. He simply raised his hand to his brow and rendered a slow, formal salute. It wasn't a required courtesy, it was an act of respect, from the heart. Later that afternoon, he and I met at a small, off-base coffee shop, the kind of anonymous place where the past felt a million miles away. We didn't talk about the gala, or the lies, or the years of pain. The silence between us was no longer a weapon. It was just quiet. After a few minutes, he reached into the inside pocket of his old leather jacket and pulled something out. He slid it across the table. It was an old photograph, its edges yellowed and soft with age. It was my mother. She was young, probably not much older than I was now, standing on an airfield, squinting into the sun. She was smiling, a brilliant, uncontainable smile, and in her hand she held a small, beautifully crafted model of a P-51 Mustang. "I kept it," he said, his voice raspy. "All these years." He looked at the picture, not at me. "She would have been so proud of you, Louise, more than you could ever know." It was the first time since she had died that he had acknowledged her, truly acknowledged her worth and her place in my story. It wasn't a full absolution, but it was a beginning. It was peace. That evening, I stood on a hill overlooking the academy, the place where my escape had begun. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Landon. "Hey, you free next week? Maybe you could teach me some of those ghost moves." A real smile, easy and unforced, spread across my face. I typed back, "You're on, little brother. Try to keep up." My father's words from a year ago echoed in my mind. No longer a painful memory, but a profound truth. Legacy is the baggage you learn to let go of. I had finally let it go. The crushing weight of the Ellis name. The desperate need to prove myself, the anger, the pain, all of it. My real legacy wasn't revenge. It was this quiet moment, this healing, this newfound connection. As if on cue, a lone F-22 Phantom X roared across the evening sky, its powerful engines a familiar song. It climbed vertically, a silver needle stitching the twilight, leaving a long, white contrail in its wake. Major Louise Ellis, the ghost, finally had her own sky. A sky with no name, no expectations, no ghosts of the past. A sky big enough to hold both the darkness of the night and the promise of the dawn. My story wasn't just about the fight, it was about the long, quiet journey of healing that comes after the battle is won. It's about learning that your value is not determined by the family you were born into, but by the sky you choose to build for yourself. If my journey has resonated with you in any way, I want you to know that your own dawn is waiting. If you believe in the power of rewriting your own story, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We're building a community of survivors here for all the ghosts who refuse to remain invisible. Thank you for listening.